Welcome to Discipleship for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material.
Honestly, it's so good to be diving into this one. It's quite a ride.
It really is. I mean, just picture this for a second. Imagine you walk into a room full of, super zealous, young, spiritual seekers today.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, but instead of sitting quietly and, praying, it's just absolute chaos.
Oh, yeah, total madness.
Yeah, you've got people staring at the ceiling with their mouths wide open like they're trying to literally catch invisible food falling from the sky.
Right, the angel's food.
Exactly. And then others are violently crossing their eyes, just straining their optic nerves until they're totally dizzy, trying to look inward, literally into their own skulls.
Sounds like a bizarre cult, honestly.
It totally does. Or tilting their heads sideways, listening for, phantom sounds in their ears. But this wasn't some modern cult. This was a literal crisis in 14th century England.
It really paints a staggering picture, doesn't it? I mean, that specific historical chaos is exactly why this anonymous author sat down to write The Cloud of Unknowing.
Right, to basically write a survival guide for these kids.
Yeah, exactly. It's intense, it's baffling, but it's undeniably brilliant. He was watching a whole generation of spiritual beginners take these poetic metaphors and they were executing them like literal physical blueprints.
Which is just so dangerous.
Oh, absolutely, to the point of giving themselves brain damage or what he deeply feared was that they were opening their minds to profound psychological and spiritual deception.
Wow. So our mission today for this deep dive is to sit right alongside you, the listener, and really unpack chapters 48 through 75 of this text.
Because we aren't just looking at this as some dusty historical artifact, right?
No, not at all. We are putting it to the test. Our focus today is exclusively on evaluating this specific section against the ultimate unchanging standard.
Which is Jesus.
Exactly. The 8 core instructions from Jesus Christ for discipleship. So we're talking repentance and faith, self-denial, cross-bearing, total devotion.
Humility and service, the law of love.
Right, and secret obedience, forgiveness and fruitfulness. That's the measuring stick.
And it has to be. We have to figure out where this medieval author captures the real, timeless truth of Christ's call and where his specific era might have pushed him into some pretty uncomfortable territory.
Yeah, maybe some imbalanced theology for sure. So to really get this, we have to understand the central burden of these chapters, what is driving him?
Well, his singular desperation, and you see this in every single paragraph from chapter 48 to the end, is to sever the reader's reliance on physical sensory experiences.
He wants to cut the cord entirely.
Completely. He wants to force them into a pure spiritual union with God.
And he uses this word all the time. He calls it a ghostly union, which, to us today sounds like a haunted house or something.
Yeah, it sounds like a horror movie. But in Middle English, ghostly just means spiritual, and bodily just means physical or sensory.
Got it. And he spends pages just begging this young disciple, the guy he's writing, to abandon what he calls the boisterousness of bodily feeling.
Which is just such a precise phrase, right?
That's so good.
He isn't just saying the physical body is loud. He's saying the whole sensory world is chaotic. It's demanding. It's totally distracting.
Yeah, it won't leave you alone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His whole philosophical argument is that because God is purely a spirit, anyone trying to be united with God or owned with him, as he says, has to do it in the absolute depth of the spirit.
Right. Any physical sensation is just an anchor dragging you down. He even says bodily things are further from God by their sheer nature than any ghostly thing.
Right. And he tells the disciple to step entirely into the not and the nowhere.
Okay, we really need to slow down here. Because not in nowhere sounds super abstract. But he's not just being poetic, is he?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
He actually maps out the entire human soul to prove exactly why the senses are so dangerous.
Yeah, it's like early cognitive science or something.
It really is. In chapters 63 through 66, he breaks the soul down into a hierarchy of powers. He's trying to explain human failure and spiritual success mechanically.
So he splits it into principal powers and secondary powers, right?
Exactly. The principal powers operate purely in the spiritual realm. But the secondary powers, they are inextricably linked to the physical body, to the senses.
Okay, let's pull that apart. So the principal powers are memory, reason, and will. Let's start with memory.
Sure. So The way he describes memory isn't just like remembering where you left your keys this morning.
Right, it's bigger than that.
Yeah, it functions more like the foundational hard drive of your soul. It doesn't actively process things, but it holds everything that the other two powers work on.
Okay, so memory is the container.
Spot on. Memory's the container. And the active work happens in reason and will. Reason is your discriminatory faculty.
Like separating things out.
Right. It divides the good from the evil from the worst, the good from the better, and finally, the better from the best.
That sounds like a pretty great tool to have.
Well, it was. He notes that before the fall, before original sin, reason could do this perfectly. Naturally.
Not now. Not so much.
Yeah. Post-fall, in our current state, reason is totally blinded. It's compromised.
And it's fascinating how he explains that blindness, because reason isn't just broken on its own, it's broken because it lacks the light it was designed for.
The light of grace.
Exactly. He insists it cannot function without being continuously illuminated by grace. And if reason is fumbling in the dark, meek labeling things, that creates a huge domino effect for the will.
Oh, catastrophic domino effect. Because the will is the engine of choice. It's the power where we actually love and desire the good, based on what reason tells it.
Right. So if reason is handing the will garbage data.
Exactly. If reason labels a temporary comfort as the ultimate good and labels spiritual discipline as painful or evil, the will just misfires constantly.
It chooses the lesser over the greater every time.
Yep. So the will is infected too, and it also needs that constant anointing of grace.
Okay, so we've got this compromised spiritual core reason and will just struggling in the dark. But then he brings in the secondary powers.
Oh boy, here we go. The battleground.
The physical body, imagination, and sensuality.
Right. So imagination in this medieval setup isn't just being creative or artistic. It's the literal image-making faculty of the brain.
Taking sensory data and throwing pictures at your mind.
Exactly. Present things, absent things. And before the fall, imagination was a perfect, obedient servant to reason.
But now it's a broken projector.
A completely broken, disobedient projector. It just constantly bombards the mind with unordained images, random memories, weird fantasies.
And honestly, anyone who has ever tried to sit in total silence and pray knows exactly what this feels like.
Oh, totally. Within seconds.
Right. You close your eyes, you're trying to focus your reason and will on God, and your imagination just violently rebels. It's like, hey, here's your grocery list.
Or here's a super awkward conversation you had a decade ago.
Yes. Or a random scene from a TV show. It's just unsolicited noise.
And the author specifically calls this disobedience of the imagination the ongoing pain of original sin. It's the mind refusing to be governed.
Which brings us to sensuality, the real troublemaker.
Sensuality is the raw power reigning in the bodily senses. It deals entirely with bodily knowing and feeling. Its whole language is comfort and discomfort.
It's like a toddler.
It is exactly like a toddler. It grumbles when it's uncomfortable, and it pushes you to consume more than you need just to feed physical lusts.
I want it now. I want it sweet. I want it comfortable.
Yes. And his description of sensuality unhinged from grace is so vivid. He says it will wretchedly and wantonly welter as a swine in the mire.
As a swine in the mire, wow.
Just wallowing in the wealths of this world and the foul flesh. It's a visceral image of being completely subjected to the physical world.
So looking at this map, his whole thesis is clear. Before the fall, the spirit bossed the body. Reason and will governed imagination and sensuality.
Right, a perfect hierarchy.
But original sin flipped the whole human machine upside down.
Exactly. The body is driving the car, and the spirit is locked in the trunk. Sensuality craves comfort, imagination throws pictures of it at the mind, reason gets clouded, and the will chooses the physical.
So he's desperately trying to reverse that. He wants the disciples' will and reason so stubbornly fixed on God that they just ignore the screaming of the body entirely.
Which brings us to the ultimate destination of all this brutal internal work. In chapter 50, he calls the end goal a chaste love.
Now, chaste love. To modern ears, that sounds like a purity ring or something purely about physical abstinence.
Right, but he's using it psychologically. Theologically, he's talking about the purity of the motive behind your love.
A love stripped of all transactional conditions.
Precisely. He notes that God often gives young disciples sweet feelings or spiritual comforts, to woo them.
With an emotional high during a worship service.
Yeah, or a sudden overwhelming peace when you're praying. It's like giving candy to a child. But a perfect chaste love does not depend on those feelings at all.
It loves the giver, not the gift. I love that analogy. If you only chase God because it makes you feel warm and fuzzy, you aren't loving God.
No, you're loving the feeling. You're loving your own sensuality, getting a spiritual treat.
Wow. And the bar he sets is terrifying. He says someone with chaste love might feel absolutely nothing, just deep, prolonged spiritual dryness.
The heavens might seem made of solid brass.
Yeah, but they don't grumble. They're perfectly content to lack those feelings if it's God's will.
Because they've separated the reality of God from their physical experience of God.
So if we test this against Jesus' instructions, which is our whole goal today when you look at total devotion and self-denial, this chaste love concept hits the absolute bullseye.
It really does. Because self-denial isn't just giving up chocolate for Lent. It's taking up a cross daily, putting aside selfish ambition.
And total devotion means seeking the kingdom above your own comfort. You can't serve two masters.
And the author clarifies this beautifully in chapter 49. He says the pure substance of spiritual perfection is nothing else but a good will.
Just a good will.
Yeah. Emotional highs, sweet sounds, physical comforts, he calls all of those accidents. They might hang on to the goodwill sometimes, but they aren't the substance.
So to deny yourself in this medieval framework is to basically murder the ego's desire for a spiritual high.
Exactly. Taking up your cross might literally mean waking up feeling totally dry, dealing with a chaotic imagination, and choosing to orient your will toward God anyway, in total silence.
That internal crucifixion leads directly to another core instruction: secret obedience. Jesus said acts of devotion must be done in secret, not for applause.
And the author pushes this secrecy to a microscopic level in chapter 48.
He does. He issues this directive that sounds like a paradox. He says, hide from God the desire of thine heart.
Hide it from God.
How do you hide anything from an omniscient God? And why would you even try?
It sounds crazy, but his logic is airtight once you get his premise. God is a purely spiritual being. So God comprehends what is locked deep in your pure spirit way better than anything your physical body does.
Because bodily things are further from God than ghostly things.
Right. So if a believer starts physically straining, clenching fists, weeping loudly, groaning, putting on a big physical show to prove to God they desire him,
they're actually moving backwards.
Completely. They are translating a pure spiritual thing into a clunky, inferior physical language.
He explicitly warns against making a bodily showing unto God.
Yeah, a physical pantomime. It contaminates the work. This is the absolute peak of secret obedience. Refusing to perform not just for other people, but for God himself.
Just trusting that God sees the naked intent of your will without you needing to put on a show, that is a staggering standard.
It strips away every single ounce of religious performance.
And he is absolutely ruthless when he contrasts this with hypocrisy, which ties right into Jesus' instruction on fruitfulness. A tree is known by its fruit.
Oh, chapters 53 and 54. He goes scorched earth on the bad fruit of false disciples.
It's almost comical how precise he is.
It really is. He's describing people who are empty on the inside, but desperately want to look holy on the outside. So they overcompensate with bizarre bodily behaviors.
He says they stare like madmen, leering as if they're seeing the devil in the corner of the room.
Or setting their eyes in their heads as they were sturdy sheep beaten in the head.
Sturdy sheep bitten in the head? I mean, what an insult. Or walking around with their heads hanging sideways like they have a worm in their ear.
It's a profound observation, though. When the internal substance is bankrupt, the external performance gets exaggerated.
He talks about the meek, piping voices, people whining in their throats instead of speaking normally, giggling with manic energy.
He diagnoses it as meek, piping hypocrisy. These people only care about projecting extreme spiritual sensitivity to other men, but they completely ignore the thousands of vain thoughts rotting in their own souls.
The physical performance is just a massive smokescreen. But then his description of good fruit is so beautiful and grounded.
Chapter 54. He says, true spiritual work governs a person full seemly. It brings grace to the body and the soul.
It doesn't make you an eccentric weirdo. It makes you profoundly, beautifully human. He says even the worst favored person becomes attractive and gracious.
Good fruit draws others into grace because it's undeniable. It brings peace to a room, it's joyful, and completely devoid of performance.
Okay, so I want to pause here. Because while this takedown of hypocrisy is brilliant, I have to push back a little. His theology regarding the physical body raises massive warning flags for me.
The anti-physical aggression.
Yeah, he's so critical of physical posture. Lifting hands, looking up, crying out. He borders on calling all physical expression inherently inferior or corrupt.
It definitely borders on dualism, like the physical is bad and the spiritual is good.
Exactly. And if we measure this against the New Testament, we have to deal with the incarnation. Jesus took on physical flesh. He broke physical bread.
He touched lepers.
Spit in the dirt to heal eyes, and he bodily ascended into heaven. How do we reconcile this intense medieval rejection of the physical with the inherently physical reality of the gospel?
Well, the author is actually highly aware of this tension, and he tries to reconcile it in chapter 58 with a masterful analogy, the cup and the wine.
Okay, tell me about the cup and the wine.
So he addresses the bodily miracles, like St. Stephen physically seeing Jesus in heaven, or the ascension into the clouds. He admits they happened physically, but he insists they were just visual aids for a ghostly spiritual meaning.
So if the disciples were spiritually mature enough, they wouldn't have needed the physical miracle.
That's his argument. It was an accommodation for their weakness. He says we should pick off the rough bark and feed on the sweet kernel.
I see.
So in his analogy, the physical act, kneeling, raising your hands, taking communion, that's the cup. The inward spiritual reality is the wine.
And he warns against smashing the cup after you drink the wine.
Exactly. He says, do not despise physical acts of worship. If your spirit naturally stirs your body to raise its hands, do it. We kiss the cup because of the wine it holds.
But the caveat is, you have to remember, it's the wine you're drinking. The spiritual meaning is the point.
Right. If you obsess over the perfect kneeling posture, but your reason and will aren't fixed on God, you're just chewing on empty pottery.
Right.
You get zero nourishment.
It's a helpful analogy, but honestly, I still think we need to scrutinize some gaps here. Because this hyper-spiritualization creates friction with the law of love and the command to humility and service.
You mean the horizontal dimension of discipleship?
Yes. Jesus' commands are deeply physical and horizontal. Love your enemies, give to the poor, wash dirty feet, bear a real physical cross in a hostile world. You have to look at the broken people around you.
And our medieval author commands the absolute opposite in chapters 59 and 70.
He says, time, place, and body. These three should be forgotten in all ghostly working. He tells the disciple to abandon all outward bodily senses entirely.
Which forces us to ask, if you retreat entirely into this cloud of unknowing, where time and body don't matter, do you abdicate your responsibility to your neighbor?
Right. If your whole spiritual life is a vertical ascent into a formless void who's feeding the hungry, John explicitly says you can't love the invisible God if you hate your visible brother.
It's a massive vulnerability in his theology. He claims nowhere bodily is everywhere ghostly. But Jesus localized his ministry. He stopped for the one bleeding woman in the physical crowd.
He was acutely aware of time, place, and body. And this imbalance leads to another huge tension in chapters 71 through 73, this tiered system of discipleship.
Oh, the Ark of the Covenant archetypes. This feels very, very medieval.
Deeply uncomfortable. He uses Moses, Bezaleel, and Aaron as three classes of Christians.
So the Ark itself is the grace of pure contemplation. Moses represents the massive majority of believers. He has to do long, grueling spiritual labor. He climbs in the mountain, waits in the dark, and only rarely gets a glimpse of the ark.
Then you have Bezaleel, the craftsman. He represents believers who get there through intense study and spiritual discipline. They work relentlessly to build the experience.
But then, at the absolute top of the hierarchy is Aaron, the high priest. He represents this elite class of souls who are so subtle in grace, they can just walk into the Holy of Holies whenever they want.
They can just turn God on like a tap.
Sitting, walking, standing, constant, effortless union with God.
I really struggle with this. Doesn't this create an inherent elitism that totally opposes Jesus?
It certainly feels that way.
Jesus preached an upside-down kingdom. The last will be first. Greatness is being the servant of all. But this guy builds a rigid hierarchy where a few elite Aaron souls have VIP access, and the common Moses souls just have to sweat and suffer.
It completely clashes with the radically open invitation of the gospel. But we have to remember the author is a product of his feudal monastic environment.
Sure.
He tries to put a Band-Aid on it in chapter 72, warning the Aaron types not to judge the Moses types, but the hierarchy is still the defining structure.
It's so much more complicated than Jesus just saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest."
There's no footnote in the gospel saying only the spiritually subtle get the constant rest.
Right. So, to give this author a fair hearing, we have to ask why. What was happening in his human context that made him write with such anti-physical, strict aggression?
It was an epidemic of
The
literalism.
literal crisis.
In the 14th century, there was this massive surge in popular piety among everyday people, which is great, but they had zero theological education. So they're getting access to metaphorical language, and they are completely unequipped to interpret it.
It's like reading a poem where someone says, "My heart took flight," and you logically decide to jump off a bridge to see if you can fly.
That is exactly what was happening with real psychological consequences. In chapters 51, 52, and 57, he documents the chaos. Young disciples read that they should look up to God.
And because their reason isn't engaged, they interpret it physically.
Yes. He says they stare in the stars as if they would be above the moon. They're going out at night, violently straining their physical eyes to pierce the planets.
Sitting with their mouths gaping open, waiting for literal angels' food to drop on their tongues.
It sounds absurd, but he's terrified for them. And they misunderstood the word in just as badly. They read that a disciple must turn their wits inward.
So instead of introspecting, they physically strain their optic and auditory nerves backwards into their own skulls.
They strain their eyes against the course of nature, listening fiercely for literal sounds echoing in their own chest cavities.
And what happens when you do that for hours? Your brain misfires.
Exactly. He says they turn their brains in their heads. They start hallucinating, smelling bizarre odors, hearing quaint sounds, feeling unnatural burning in their bowels.
And because they want a spiritual experience so badly, the second the hallucination starts, they declare it's the undeniable presence of God.
When in reality, they're inducing physiological trauma. And in his worldview, this opens the door for demonic deception. The devil sees this desperate physical straining and steps in with false lights and sweet smells to derail the soul.
So when you realize he's basically acting as a triage nurse for a generation driving themselves insane, the extreme rhetoric makes sense. He's screaming, "Stop staring at the sun, you'll go blind." God is a spirit.
That context redeems so much of his harshness. He had to violently tear them away from the physical because it was destroying them.
And honestly, human psychology hasn't changed. We just have more sophisticated ways of making the same errors today.
Which brings us to the modern discipleship translation. We have to bring this into the 21st century.
And there is no better place to start than the most bizarre, unforgettable image in the whole book, chapter 55, the one-nostril demon.
Oh, it's grotesque. But the theological payload is staggering.
He's describing how the devil deceives people who think they are filled with the fire of Christian charity, but are actually burning with the fire of hell.
Right, he says those who practice necromancy report a consistent anatomical anomaly when the devil appears physically. He always has but one single massive nostril.
And he tilts his head back so you can look straight up through that hole right into his brain, which is consumed by the fire of hell, nightmare fuel. But why one nostril?
Because the physical structure of a human knows the septum that divides it into two nostrils symbolizes the spiritual power of discretion.
Oh, wow. Discretion is the septum.
Yes, discretion is the pause, the ability to inhale, filter, and separate truth from lies, good from evil, nuance from generalization.
It requires time. It requires reason illuminated by grace.
But the devil has zero discretion, pure, undivided, reactive impulse. The fire of hell has a straight path to the outside world.
And he applies this terrifying diagnosis to the religious hypocrites of his day, right?
He does. He says the devil inflames their imagination so they lose all discretion. They act like busy prelates, self-appointed bishops constantly pointing out everyone else's defaults.
Utterly convinced they are operating out of God's love.
But the author drops the hammer. He says, truly they lie, for it is with the fire of hell welling in their brains. They're infected with the one-nostril disease.
If we translate this to the 21st century, he just wrote the ultimate psychological autopsy of internet call-out culture.
Oh, absolutely. The toxic corners of online discernment ministries.
You log on to social media and you see thousands of believers exhibiting this exact pathology, zero relational connection to the people they attack, zero discretion, blasting everyone else's defaults, convinced they are righteous defenders of truth.
And this medieval author is pointing across 7 centuries saying, no, you just have one nostril. Yeah. That is the fire of hell in your brain.
It's a devastating critique. It totally violates Jesus' teaching on humility. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and ignore the plank in your own?
Operating without the two nostrils of careful, compassionate discretion is aligning with the demonic, not the divine.
Man, that is so convicting. And there's another modern translation we have to hit. We talked about Chaste Love earlier. Stripping away reliance on the accidents of spiritual sweetness. Let's apply that to modern Christian worship.
Because we have essentially engineered the precise opposite of chaste love in our modern environments.
Think about the modern megachurch experience. We spend millions optimizing the physical, sensory experience of Sunday morning. Perfect moody lighting.
Subwoofers tuned to vibrate your chest cavity.
Chord progressions scientifically proven to make you cry. We are bombarding sensuality and imagination with perfectly curated stimuli.
And the grave danger is that we've trained a whole generation to equate those physiological reactions with the undeniable presence of the Holy Spirit.
We judge our spiritual lives by the emotional intensity of a 20-minute music set. We are obsessively playing with the wrapping paper.
Drinking the wine, but absolutely worshiping the cup.
So his challenge is piercing. If the power grid failed, the smoke machine broke, the band stopped playing, and all those warm, fuzzy feelings vanished, would your love for God remain?
If your immediate reaction is to grumble and say the Spirit just wasn't moving today, then your love is not chaste. You love the comfort, not the Creator. The substance of perfection is a good will, not a good baseline.
Wow. Okay, there is one more modern translation. Chapters 68 through 70, the most difficult concept in the book. Leaving the ought and choosing the not.
Yeah, he explicitly commands the disciple to be nowhere bodily. This is apophatic theology, the via negativa.
Meaning the negative way.
Right. Because God is infinite, any mental image we hold of him is inherently finite and therefore infinitely smaller than God. Even picturing him as a warm light is a mental idol.
So you have to strip away every image, every concept, and enter a state of nothingness. The not, reaching out with a blind intent of the will into the dark.
And he contrasts this not with the ought. The ought represents everything we are, everything we possess, everything we desire to be in the eyes of the world.
Which is a direct assault on our modern cultural obsession with identity and platform.
We are totally consumed by the ought. We want to be somebody. We want influence. Personal brands.
We want to be omnipresent digitally across 5 social media platforms, always seen, always relevant.
But the author writes, I'd rather be so nowhere bodily, wrestling with that blind knot, than to be so great a lord that I might, when I would be everywhere bodily, merrily playing with all this ought.
It's a radical call to embrace obscurity. Are you willing to be a perfectly content remaining a nobody in the eyes of the world, entirely forgotten by the culture, if it means your spirit is engaged with God?
It's the ultimate antidote to the influencer culture infecting the modern church. It points straight back to Jesus. Your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you.
Do we want to perform for the crowd or rest in the knot?
Yeah. Okay, so let's move to practical application. How do we make this actionable for the listener?
Well, the first major insight is the test of chaste love. This requires a deeply empathetic look in the mirror.
I know for me, when my prayer life feels dry, my instinct is to complain that God is distant. I feel slighted, which is the natural reaction of the unchaste will. So the practice here is reflection. The next time you pray or walk into church and the experience is just completely empty, profound silence, no hi.
Pay close attention to your internal reaction. Instead of panicking, view it as an opportunity. This is your moment to offer God a chaste love. It flips the script on spiritual dryness.
You get to say, I'm here for you, not for the feelings you give me. I am well pleased to lack them.
Insight number 2 is the audit of the soul's powers. Take chapters 64 through 66 and inventory your internal life this week.
Who is actually sitting in the driver's seat? Are your reason and will illuminated by grace, choosing what is good even when it's uncomfortable?
Or has sensuality hijacked the system? Is your desire for comfort or your need for the next dopamine hit from your phone dictating your choices?
If the secondary powers are bossing around the principal powers, you are living out the inversion of original sin.
Insight number 3 is the danger of the piping voice. Evaluate your outward religious persona.
When you're around other believers, do you physically or verbally act differently? Do you put on a specific, highly spiritualized vocabulary just to sound more devout?
Are you spending more energy performing a character of holiness than you are actually repenting of the hidden ugly sins in your own heart? The author warns that this is fundamentally hollow.
Be plain, be sober, be seemly, be yourself, but yourself submitted entirely to God.
As we bring this to a close, we need to exercise some of that discretion. We have to separate the timeless value from the medieval baggage. What's the most valuable thing a modern disciple can extract from this?
The crown jewel is in chapter 67, the staggering concept of being made a God in grace.
It's an incredible balance. On one hand, he demands we confront our absolute poverty of spirit. We are infinitely beneath the nature of God, which aligns with Jesus' call to repentance.
But he refuses to leave us there. He pivots to the triumph of faith. He said, through pure grace and infinite mercy, without any earning on our part, we are lifted up and perfectly united with him in spirit.
We are elevated into union with the divine solely because he loves us. It's a breathtaking articulation of the gospel.
And he pairs it with this beautiful encouragement in chapter 75, quoting St. Gregory. All holy desires grow by delays.
If you feel like God is a million miles away and your prayers are hitting a brass ceiling, God's delay is not his rejection. He might be intentionally withholding the feeling of his presence so your capacity for him can stretch and grow deeper.
Immense comfort. But as mentors guiding you, we have to flag the areas where his intensity requires careful filtering.
Yeah, the toxic rhetoric. In chapter 56, he attacks anyone who disagrees with him theologically, calls them Antichrist disciples and foul lechers privily.
Classic medieval polemics. Yeah. Disagree with me and you must be grotesquely immoral and demonically aligned.
We have to chew the meat and spit out the bones here. We embrace the call to deep contemplative prayer. We quiet our sensuality. But we absolutely reject the medieval assumption that the physical body is inherently corrupt.
And we don't have to accept that anyone who struggles with this is on the road to literal madness.
We have to filter this intense asceticism through the life of Jesus. Jesus didn't call people who misunderstood him foul lechers. He washed their dirty feet.
He fed their physical bodies.
We pursue the purity of spirit, the Cloud of Unknowing champions, but we pair it with the compassionate, physical, world-engaging love Jesus modeled.
The not and the nowhere are powerful places to meet God. But eventually you have to walk back out of that cloud, re-enter time and place, and love your physical neighbor in the here and now.
We cultivate devotion and the hidden secrets of the Spirit, but the fruit of that secret work governs us full seemly in the physical world, drawing every broken person we meet toward the exact same grace we found in the dark. That's the heart of this section. This is discipleship for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.